quiet rumbling of distant thunder and the steady patter of rainfall outside stir me gently out of a sound slumber. The cool morning air of my room combined with the secure warmth of my big down comforter do little to incentivize me to leave my mattress. The soft pink cotton of the bedclothes simply feels too nice against the bare skin of my legs. My own little pink island of trapped body heat in the cold sea of macabre black that is the rest of my little lair. My own cozy little den where I am free to brood upon the works of the old masters, Poe, King, Barker, and Lovecraft, brood beneath the imposing costume visages of the likes of Tony Todd, Tim Curry, Jeffrey Combs, and Robert Englund, who loom over me from the framed, glossy prints hanging on the walls, my dark sanctuary where I may sketch, paint, and sculpt the nameless things that skulk and claw their way out of my own twisted imagination. The corners of my mouth perk into a grin of wicked amusement at the thought of Mom's reaction to any of my projects. She'd shriek at the sheer unbridled horror I would put into a charcoal sketch, or give one of my nightmare sculptures a wide breath, but always keep it in her periphery. It got to the point where I'd use her response to gauge how effective any given piece would be at unnerving the normies. And it was always a rather effective way of keeping her at a distance when she had a mind to invade my privacy. Always complaining that horror, in all its forms, isn't a very savory indulgence for a young lady, she always threatened to trash my art, posters, props, or figures. I had absolutely no appreciation of having to fish my 1/6 scale Pumpkinhead and Brad Dourif autographed Good Guy doll out of a dumpster once upon a time. I still haven't quite forgiven her for that particular offense. Now that I'm on my own, I can surround myself with as many killer clowns, gremlins, and vulnerable mass psycho killers and extra-dimensional masochistic theologians from hell as I like, without worrying about Mom attempting to rescue me from them. Now reminded of my big girl freedom, a sudden giddy thrill threatens to force an overtly girlish squeal out of my throat. I quickly grab Big Bill, the black and gray patchwork stuffed bunny with red button eyes that makes his burrow between my sheets. I bury my face into the soft mohair fur of his little chest to muffle the embarrassingly high-pitched release with his cotton innards. When I feel my little fit contained, I withdraw my face from Big Bill's raggedy old chest. Yet again, I mumble a lamentation for naming him after the leader of the Losers Club from Stephen King's It, rather than Frank, the twisted black bunny that haunts the dreams of Donnie Darko. But it's his name, and taking it back feels wrong somehow. Like he wouldn't be the same Big Bill if I did. I'm suddenly aware of a warm feeling swelling up in my chest as I gaze upon the old stitched and restitched thing with a nostalgic affection. Corinthians tells us to put away childish things when we reach adulthood. But I will never put aside my constant companion, oldest confidant, and nighttime protector. No one listens to my woes and keeps the boogeyman away like Big Bill does. Through my squishy affection, I can feel a pang of growing embarrassment warming my face in response to this infantile attachment to the inanimate assembly of cotton and twine. Cotton and twine less than accurately shaped in effigy of the order Lagomorpha. I quickly will myself upright and climb out of bed to leave the rising shame where it manifested, to escape it before love of the stuffed bunny sends me spiraling down a rabbit hole of revisiting every awkward and uncomfortable memory of my 2 decades of life, as the human mind sees fit to do when idling in repose. Free of the down comforter, the cool morning air gooses my flesh and sends a brisk electric tingle through my body. Retrieving my glasses from the nightstand and settling the black framed lenses before my eyes, I pluck the black Miskatonic University hoodie off of my mahogany easel and slip it over my head before shuffling my bare feet over to the sliding glass door that leads to my second-floor balcony. I give the oversized hoodie another tug in the front to ensure that any passers-by on the street below are denied an upskirt view. Though I'm wearing a nice pair of Brazilian butterfly briefs, suitable for putting on a show, I'd much rather host a private party than a street performance. Brushing aside a few of the vertical blinds hanging in front of the balcony door reveals the dreary gray of the sickly Sausalito sky. The rain falls steadily, and the horizon over Richardson Bay is dark with ominous black clouds creeping closer inland. A particularly nasty-looking gloom that's more akin to a thick, menacing fog that flashes with wild lightning just beyond the surface. "Happy birthday, Antonio Bay," I quietly lament in my best Adrian Barbeau Radio KAB 1340 voice. By the look of that menacing nimbostratus, and the storm drains down on the street already beginning to struggle to fulfill their function. By the look of that menacing nimbostratus, and the storm drains down on the street already beginning to struggle to fulfill their function, it would seem that Hurricane Megan has decided to arrive early, yet again making the weather reporters appear just shy of competent. Not good. She wasn't supposed to really get going until tomorrow. They predict that Megan is going to be one absolute mega bitch with a severity of 4 out of 5 on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. They're predicting the property damage alone to be pretty bad. At least the director of the Marin County Department of Health and Human Services already activated the county's emergency severe weather shelter at the Marin Health and Wellness campus in Old San Rafael. We'd planned on tying up some loose ends before heading to the shelter today anyway. I guess we could just get started now and rush on over. Speaking of we, I mutter under my breath. Scanning the street below with squinted eyes, I quickly find the little eyesore I was looking for. The indestructible crone. Sophia Rizzo's invulnerable little black and white 1964 Volkswagen van, parked placidly down there in the rain, clashing with everything around it like some sort of strange relic out of time. Much like her driver, who herself has something of an old soul, the damn thing is well over 50 years old, but she keeps it in absolutely pristine condition. No one really knows how she does it, and when asked, she only ever responds with a painfully unremarkable regular oil changes, in her usually flat, matter-of-fact tone. But Sophia is kind of funny like that. Down to earth, quiet, keeps to herself, and full of remarkable wisdom and good sense for someone who hasn't even seen 23 years of life. Decidedly goth in her sense of fashion, but has a raven-haired beauty that would translate very well to a retro rockabilly style, especially with her pale skin, lime green eyes, and that little beauty mark just above her lip. Honestly, until recently, we didn't even move in the same circle. After we started sharing recipes and a mutual love of horror, we just sort of clicked. Well, I have a love of horror. I can sit for hours regaling a riveted audience with topics ranging from the full production histories of obscure 1980s Italian rip-off films to naming the material they used to make Scream Queen Linnea Quigley's prosthetic periwinkle in Return of the Living Dead, and everything in between. It was alginate, by the way. But Sophia, while sufficiently amused by my particular fancies, her obsessions are of a more occult nature than my own. She is so well versed in legends, myths, demonology, and folklore from around the world that I often wonder why she shows absolutely no interest in pursuing a career in history, anthropology, or even parapsychology. She seems curiously content to leave her hobbies confined to simply expanding her own general fund of knowledge, and ekes out a living as an assistant boxing trainer, which is how we met, actually. She's my roommate Sylvia's friend and assistant trainer. Her best friend Kitty is Sylvia's cutman, and her late father's good friend is her coach. Funnier still, Sophia's late father was a professional boxer. The girl has known how to throw a punch since before she could even walk, but has absolutely no earthly interest in becoming a fighter herself. Sylvia is always getting into trouble, but good old Spumoni is usually there to knock her back in line. It really is a silly little nom de guerre they've given to her. I'll never admit it to any of them, but Spumoni is the perfect description of Sophia. In addition to acknowledging her Italian heritage, the multi-layered, somewhat cold but sweet dessert is accurately comparable to the girl. Of all of Sylvia's friends, she is easily the most sensible and level-headed. I guess we seem to have connected a little as kindred spirits for all the babysitting and mother-henning we've taken upon ourselves. Add to that our mutual appreciation of cooking and the things that go bump in the night, and you've got the beginnings of a pretty solid friendship. I suppose it's a good thing that Kitty is on a trip with her parents in Nevada, and my wild ginger roommate flew to Japan last week for an international booty call. They're great, but being cooped up in a storm shelter with them doesn't exactly sound like a barrel of laughs. Just having Sophia to deal with is going to make this whole ordeal rather painless. Well, as painless hunkering down on a crummy old cot for a couple days surrounded by strangers and eating dry rations while wondering if my condo is still standing can be. I'm certainly glad that I convinced her to stay here last night, since her house is farther away from the shelter and I don't have to wait for her to come pick me up. We can just finish getting everything together, hop in the crone, and head on over to the shelter without much fuss. We girls need to look out for each other after all. I just hope she didn't have any trouble sleeping on Sylvia's worn-out mattress. Yogsa Thoth knows that thing is more damaged than Laurie Strode on November 1st, 1978. At least the downstairs neighbors stopped complaining. I think they've just given up, and everyone involved is just kind of resigned to just lying back and taking it as it comes. Despite Sylvia's shenanigans, the rent is reliably paid on time, most of the time. The thought of her mischief curls a little smile onto my face. Though I would never openly condone some of her more impulsive antics, I must admit that she has her own charming brand of wabi-sabi going on. Suddenly the quiet whisper of a masculine voice vibrates behind me. It ominously repeats. The unexpected displacement of the stillness that blanketed my chamber forces me to abandon the balcony door and my wandering thoughts. I motion toward my phone, the source of the voice quietly coaxing maternal vengeance. Unplugging it from the charger, I pluck the little electronic device from the nightstand and thumb the screen to life. With a few flicks of my index finger, I discover a new text message from Daddy. An amused chuckle involuntarily bounces my shoulders. In his own delightful way, Papa Duke has so graciously informed me that Hurricane Megan is moving in faster than originally anticipated, and ever so kindly instructs me to get my narrow black behind to that shelter. He goes on to threaten that if my cell phone GPS isn't pinging to the medical campus in San Rafael within the hour, I'll have Hurricane Daddy to deal with, and by the time little Megan moves in, she'll be standing there wondering why all of Sausalito is knocked down, when all she was going to do was blow the leaves off of the trees. He goes on to assure me that he is not playing with me, and ends with an invitation to test him, along with a warm reminder from Mom to pack plenty of sensible underwear. I thumb a quick, submissively compliant response and send it off into the digital ether. Now filled with the warm and fuzzy feeling of my father threatening my personal safety to preserve it, I am afflicted with a powerful urge to gather my things, Sophia, and maybe start moseying on down to the old storm shelter. I motion toward the closed door of my room, and as soon as I take that first step, my phone vibrates violently in my hand and releases the painfully unpleasant buzzing and long-droning beep of the emergency weather alert. I wince back a bit from the crying device rattling the bones in my hand and assaulting my eardrums. An unpleasant grimace contorts my facial features. First, in reaction to the violation of 2/5 of my sensory perceptions, and second, for the annoyance of already being more ahead of the curve than the people who get paid to be actually ahead of the curve. I pocket the crying smart device in my hoodie with a weary sigh of dismissal and continue to my door. As soon as the seal of my macabre little chamber is broken and I'm exposed to the air of the condo proper, I jerk back a pace as if the horrible reeking stench that has suddenly assaulted my nose has physically struck me. It is a powerfully putrid stink that hangs heavy in the air like a dense fog, the kind of rancid, sickly, sweet pungency of rotting fish. Some mechanism of self-preservation triggers a reflex to cover the lower half of my face with the back of my hand, in an attempt to hinder more of the noxious fumes from entering my nose. Whoa, that is rank, I exclaim before the thought can even fully form. My diaphragm violently spasms once as the smell tickles my gag reflex. Fortunately, it is only the single wretch, and last night's dinner doesn't make a second appearance. But if this cruelty to my nose begins settling on my tongue, I can't say how long I can keep my food down. Since Sylvia and I keep the condo relatively clean, and Sophia is always a model guest, I can't imagine what the cause of such a horrible stench could be. Squinting my stinging and watering eyes, I make my way down the hall toward the common area, calling out to Sophia with as much humor as my churning stomach will allow. Sophia? Either you're gutting weak old fish on the coffee table in there, or the Intima Orgy Club is meeting in my living room. If not, one of us is having a serious pH imbalance. Suddenly Sophia's voice cuts me off from the common area just as I round the corner. Good morning, Jeena, she spouts in an uncharacteristically chipper tone. My brow dips with bemused suspicion as my brain rejects the paradox of Sophia Rizzo's voice used to express any degree of perk. I've personally never heard her say anything with a tone that wasn't decidedly flat, or one that could easily be mistaken for outright apathy for the world. When I round the corner and my eyes set upon her, she is knelt down in front of the coffee table with the little plastic wastebasket from the bathroom in one hand and plucking little fragments of plastic and metal from out of the carpet fibers with the other. From what I can tell by the shape of the component pieces, I would bet my Kane Hodder autographed hockey mask that this little demolished electronic used to be her cell phone. Before my mind can process any earthly reason how or why her phone has been so thoroughly obliterated, I can feel a little haze settle over my mind. The suffocating miasma is infinitely worse in the common area. My head begins to swim as the dank, oppressive foulness settles a growing dizziness over me. Here, the sickly sweet smell of the rotting sea is joined by something I only vaguely detected before, presumably more close to the source than ever, along with a moist funk of fish. My poor nose can detect but ever so fragrant overtones of raw sewage. It's an absolutely overpowering bouquet, and before I can start pondering how the source of this misery will likely cause me my security deposit, I notice the strangeness of Sophia. She drops the last few shards of plastic into the wastebasket and stands. She quickly adjusts the gray dolphin shorts hugged tightly around the curvature of her well-toned backside with a tug of her index fingers before giving a quick dusting to the front of her black Bauhaus Signet hoodie with the bottom of her palm. She stands there smiling at me. It's a rather uncanny sight. All teeth and awkwardly shaped like someone not at all accustomed to the unambiguously overt cheer associated with wide grinning. I can feel my eyes go wide in the headlights of this off-putting display of tooth and gum. But the longer these eyes are fixed upon the goth Italian before them, the more strangeness they can detect. Though her mouth is contorted into a grin, her eyes, however, display no pretense of joy. The upper lids are sunk low, and her brow is scrunched in the middle in vague apology. Upon closer inspection, she appears to be straining against the horrid stench, but there's also something else there. An uneasy conflict raging on beneath the surface. Like there's something she desperately wants to tell me, but is hesitant to evoke my response. It's not polite to insult a lady's freshness, she states with a flimsy confidence. Surely, she knew I was joking. Sophia isn't the sensitive type, and I've heard profoundly worse insults than that roll off of her like her skin was made of waxed chrome. She appears to be slightly trembling, but before my mind can ponder this puzzle any longer, I notice her big green eyes give a quick glance over my shoulder. Before my own eyes can follow, she extends an arm in invitation for me to sit on the sofa backed up against the bar that separates the living room from the kitchen. Stunned confusion moves my feet and guides my bottom to the couch cushion at the end of the sofa near Sylvia's armchair, where Sophia takes a seat. I study her intently with great curiosity as she clenches her jaw tightly. She still seems to be struggling with whatever bit of knowledge she possesses that I have yet to be made privy. Now drawn up close to her, I can see that the pale skin of her right cheek is rose red, disproportionately more than any other visible length of exposed flesh. She sits straight back on the edge of the chair and has an arm carefully draped over her midsection, gently favoring a few of her ribs with that palm of that hand. Jeena, Auntie is here, and she doesn't want us to be rude. Sophia carefully states with a sober calm, though a strange chill prickles to life within me upon hearing that. My brain offers no initial verbal response to it. I find myself more confused than before. Auntie, I'm a rather swarthy chocolate, and if Sophia were any more vanilla, she'd be albino. We have no familial connection to the best of my knowledge, or share any mutual affection for any older woman we have in common enough to call such a thing. Auntie? I ask confusedly. I find myself perplexed and wondering if the overwhelmingly noxious fumes that foul the air of my condo have somehow had an effect on Sophia's mind. I need to get her outside and call management to see if they can pop over to deal with this before the hurricane gets going. It's probably got something to do with the storm already playing hell on the sewer system. If so, the best I can do is make sure there are no messes inside the condo and let the city handle it. Whatever I do, I better do it quick before everything I own is skunked forever or we get caught in the storm. Suddenly, Sophia spasms, as if suppressing a shudder with great difficulty. Her back somehow goes more rigid than it was before, and her knees lock together, with her hands resting atop them, as if she were caught misbehaving by someone who holds some sort of authority over her. Her eyes quickly shift over my shoulder again, but remain fixed there this time. The awful stench of dead fish floating in a sea of hot feces ignites fresh misery in my nose, tongue, and throat. The intensity of the foulness seems to have suddenly increased 100-fold, as if the sickening source were sat right in my own lap. My hands move of their own will to quickly close both airways in sheer instinct of self-preservation. My esophagus shortens, and I do my best to suppress the churning bile that threatens to violently free itself from the confines of my digestion. I feel a horrid chill come to life in my tailbone before it runs coldly up the length of my spine, making the entire assembly of bone go straight as it passes over each vertebrae. An overwhelming sense of foreboding looms over me as the air hangs heavy with an ineffable wrongness, in addition to the unholy stench. Suddenly and without warning, I find myself very hesitant to make any sudden movement and carefully follow Sophia's gaze over my shoulder as my breathing begins to labor with anticipatory dread. A phantom crawling begins troubling every inch of my flesh as if an entire colony of roaches were marching up from the back of my panties to explore the length of my back. A reflexive swallow attempts to force the forming lump in my throat down, but the dryness of my mouth lends no lubricant to clear my esophagus of the sudden obstruction. I feel myself begin to tremble a bit just as my periphery begins to decipher a vague shape hovering just behind my right shoulder. Great Cthulhu! I scream in absolute terrified panic, scrambling instinctively away from the startling image before me. My mechanism for flight has scurried my backside off of the sofa and right into Sophia's lap and Sylvia's armchair. I sit there with every muscle tensed as physically possible, with arms slightly raised in defense as I attempt to endure the debilitating agony of my heart trying to thrash itself right out of its cage of bone. My lungs vacuum with two hard, unflattering gasps in an attempt to start them working properly again. The anterior eminences of my soles are pressed so hard into the carpet in preparation for escape that I can feel every muscle and tendon in either foot burning with strain. Though I can feel my body violently trembling as if the temperature of the room has dropped to below freezing, the initial shock wanes enough that a small amount of my rational processes can go to work on the image before me. There, leaned over the bar into the living room from the kitchen, is an old woman. An old woman with a red scarf wrapped neatly around her head with white polka dots. No, not just a scarf. A babushka, I think it's called. Peeking out from the center of this red and white package is a face like I've never seen before outside of fiction. An impossibly pale face with all the color of a corpse bled dry. There are more wrinkles and folds contorting her hairless canvas of flesh than I ever thought possible on anyone of any advanced age. It is drawn tight in strange places while hanging oddly loose where bone and muscle should be firming it. A face so blighted with age and possibly illness that it would be difficult to decipher any expression were the old woman not grinning ear to ear, exposing cracked yellow teeth budding from gums so dark they appear black. 2 rows of oddly squared bone, caked in brown and yellow plaque and tartar like misaligned headstones in a long neglected cemetery. They seem too big to fit her almost lipless mouth, more like novelty joke teeth than anything else. If they're dentures, then whoever fashioned them should lose their license to practice dentistry. I would wager their authenticity, though. Even with the length of half the sofa now between us, I can feel the hot stench of tooth decay falling off of them so thick that I may actually see the noxious cloud if I looked long enough. The most chilling aspect about her, however, are her eyes. Like the horrid teeth, they appear entirely too big for her face. Bulging, bugged open and unblinking. The 2 pale blue irises point in different directions. And though I can feel her penetrating gaze upon me, you would never know it since both pupils seem to be fixed to points on either side of me, spaced too far apart and surrounded by sagging purple flesh. They seem almost unmarred by time or illness like the rest of her leathery hide. Like 2 perfectly smooth golf balls without any red lines streaking across the porcelain white orbs that would indicate blood flow or that they are even made of flesh. Another moment passes in uncomfortable silence as she simply leans over the bar into the living room from the kitchen, so perfectly still that I can't even detect the subtle movement of breathing. She simply grins and stares to the point that I begin questioning if Sophia hasn't just sprung some elaborate prank on me with some sort of posable horror prop. But before my mind can dismiss anything else and even begin to take comfort in this thought, the old woman's impossibly wide smile stretches slightly bigger with the sound reminiscent of a wet thumb sliding across the surface of a balloon, a gesture with all the mechanical awkwardness of someone who does not have full control of their facial muscles. Before my mind can fully process this oddity any further, she suddenly springs to life as if someone switched her on. She quickly ducks back into the kitchen and with lightning speed rounds the corner into the living room, her walk not being the gait of a decrepit old lady with the frailty of advanced age and possibly illness, but a bizarre hobbling limp, a sort of swooning, wide-legged waddle with a circling of her torso to compensate for some abnormal distribution of weight, though whatever malady she is afflicted with makes her move this way, it does not, however, slow her. I can only approximate it to the scurrying of a giant cockroach that has figured out how to go upright on its back 2 legs. Her hunched and frail-looking body is deceptively quick. Before I can even blink, she is hovering her horrible, pale face a few inches from mine and wringing her hands with all the charm of a fly cleaning itself. She simply stares at me like some sort of hungry mantis appraising a potential meal. I'm suddenly aware of Sophia's heart drumming fast against my back. Despite sitting right on top of her, I'd forgotten she or anything else existed in the presence of this bizarre stranger. Now that I have mind of her again, I can feel her body trembling out of sync with my own, creating some sort of weird, uncomfortable, clashing vibration between us. Sophia is frightened. This sickly, unarmed old woman in a polka-dotted babushka actually frightens Sophia. I don't like that one bit. I've seen this girl put down a bouncer in a dive bar in San Bruno with a couple well-placed punches without so much as furrowing her brow. But this old lady has her... Suddenly a high-pitched squeak escapes my throat in response to a sudden sharp sting crying out from my cheek. My attention snaps back from my wandering thoughts to discover the sickly gray of a purple-tipped thumb and forefinger clamped onto the meat of the left side of my face. My eyes shift to the alabaster orbs bulging lifelessly out of the old woman's weathered face. I attempt to meet her gaze, but I find it difficult to match the crooked field of vision.
"Hide your shame, beloved,"
the old woman croaks discreetly in a tone one uses when politely informing someone they have a booger. The words pass through her parted yellow teeth, riding on a fresh cloud of putrid decay that burns my sinuses and makes my eyes water. Words spoken with next to no natural femininity, but in a deep, tinny hum that vibrates the air around it and could easily be mistaken for a man. Vaguely reminiscent of Ruth Pointer's deep vocals on the song Automatic, but with none of the Grammy award-winning charm of the eldest Pointer sister. It's very much more a flimmy, cigarette-y voice than that of a seasoned vocalist who can dip well outside of her natural range. She stops bruising her thumbprint into my cheek and points down with the long, skinny index finger of her noticeably oversized hand, a rather gnarled appendage with skin stretched so taut across the bone that it looks as though the wormy, paper-thin flesh, hashed with dark blue veins creeping beneath, will tear if she moves too suddenly. My burning eyes follow that finger down to the purplish tip that is pointing to the exposed front of my Brazilian butterfly briefs. I quickly slam my knees together and adjust the lower half of my Miskatonic hoodie so that my no-no square is no longer on display. I can feel my face tingle with embarrassment, and though this stranger has invaded my home, an instinct for modesty quickly whips my head back up to offer her a grimace of awkward apology. The sudden motion and the rancid odor reminiscent of low tide in a swamp cemetery makes my head swim a bit. I can feel a growing ache of rebellion to this woman's unbelievably strong stench settling into my skull. I'm also growing more and more aware of a moist griminess settling onto my skin, as if the fallout of her abysmal hygiene is coating everything in the vicinity in an oily film of sour foulness. The sudden rumbling vibrations of distant thunder remind me that Sophia and I must gather our things and start making our way toward the storm shelter in San Rafael. We have no time to entertain creepy old women.
"Modesty and well-kept attire are essential for every proper young lady to maintain,"
the old hag says proudly, vibrating the air with another tinny rasp of her voice and fouling it with another waft of fresh fetor. She stands slightly more erect and adjusts the dark blue dress covering her lumpy body, an undoubtedly European style, well kept, tied at the waist with a red cord that matches the babushka, and a hem that falls just above the ankles of her bare purple-toed feet. The dress and the long-sleeve blouse with the red pattern on the upper arms are clearly relics out of time, something you'd expect a village woman to wear hundreds of years ago, something you'd expect to see in a fairy tale or worn as traditional festival attire, but nothing anyone walking around in the modern age would wear on a regular basis. Whatever. This is my home. I pay half of the exorbitant rent here, and we don't have time to entertain someone's soiled, sundowning grandmother. We need to get to the shelter before Hurricane Megan starts tearing through Sausalito like Chunk and Slaw through a tub of rocky road. Though I can feel the irritation growing, I still can't imagine myself just tossing a senile old lady out into a Category 4 hurricane and pissing off to the shelter like an absolute sociopath. She's clearly lost and confused. Her family is more than likely looking for her, and I know if it were Meemaw Duke, I'd hope that whoever found her would be nice enough to help her. I suppose a bit of patience is necessary. Ma'am, you seem to be a bit confused, I carefully offer before continuing. I don't know you, but I'm sure that you've heard that there's a big hurricane headed this way. Ahead of schedule, actually. Sophia and I need to pack up and go to the shelter before we get stuck here in the storm. You could come with us. Maybe your family is already there. What's your name, sweetheart? There's a long silence that is only broken by the distant rumble of thunder that sounds closer than before. The old woman simply stares back with her crooked gaze. Her throat moves with the uncomfortable, sound of a thick, wet glob of phlegm being forced back down her esophagus in preparation to speak.
"Why, I'm your dear auntie, child,"
she croaks in a voice that's all cigarettes and a throat full of broken glass, but in a tone as warm and sweet as fresh blueberry pie. Sickly sweet and sour like her breath as they were, there was nothing in her words but pure matter-of-fact lucidity. Despite the inaccuracy of her statement, I can't detect any dazed confusion associated with any sort of dementia that I'm aware of. Not that I'm an expert or anything, but the few words that she's spoken thus far have been clear and coherent, to a point. She sounds so sincere, in fact, that something in me questions my own perception of the truth. But again, Sophia is damn near pure-blooded Italian, and despite my bohemian art and film nerd status, I'm black as pitch. Well, 70% cacao anyway. There just isn't anyone that links us on a genetic level, nor do we share any non-familial association close enough to affectionately address as Auntie. This isn't helping us get out of here any quicker. She's just going to have to let Sophia and I take care of her. We're the ones with sound minds, so we're in charge. Lady, please move aside so we can all get to safety, I politely say to her as I stand from Sophia's lap. I reach out to place my hands gently on her shoulders, but before they can rest there, the old woman's left palm swipes across my face so hard that I can hear something in my neck click. A loud clap echoes off the condo walls as I crumble to the floor under the immense force of the blow. My glasses fly off of my face and fall to the carpet with me. I quickly roll over to my side with a palm over the burning skin of my cheek. Looking up at the smiling woman, my mouth hangs open in wordless, wide-eyed shock. Sophia quickly stands, but before her legs are even completely straight, the old woman has fixed her grinning face in her direction. Though her ghastly face is unchanged, her body language is that of someone who is prepared to deal with a threat. Sophia tenses for confrontation, but ultimately remains still. This woman's crooked glare has frozen the trained fighter in place. Sophia's brow twitches once, as she clearly restrains herself. I finally understand. Sophia isn't necessarily afraid of this woman. She isn't willing to fight her. But is it because she doesn't want to harm an old lady? Or because she thinks that fighting her is a losing battle?
Now, precious girl. Remember our talk before Jeena joined us? We'll have no more sass out of you today.
The old woman coos sweetly to Sophia, who bites her lower lip and gently palms her left side wistfully. Sophia stands her ground but does not make a move, despite the desire to do so burning violently in her big green eyes. I have a nagging suspicion that the word talk should have been said with the inflection of something in quotations, but the twisted hag said it with the same sweet sincerity that she's said everything else with up till this point. When satisfied that Sophia is nailed in place, the old woman giggles sweetly before her face swivels back to me so rapidly that I can hear an unsettling flesh-muffled pop from her neck. My heart thumps once in response to regaining her attention, and the instinct to scamper away begins scratching at me, but something inside tells me to avoid any sudden movement.
Now as for you, beloved, you must remember your manners, please. Call me Auntie,
she coos as if she hadn't just slapped the taste out of my mouth. She spoke these words with all the pleasant sweetness of honey, but I doubt she is making a request. I get the feeling that she did not ask me to do so. I think I've been told. I'm suddenly aware of my unease and even my sympathy twisting into swelling anger. Who the hell, Michigan, is this funky old lady to come into my home, slap me right in my face, and try to muscle me and my guest into calling her Auntie? I'm all for helping the elderly, but I am not going to be treated like this. Lady, are you completely out of your mind? I growl, shifting my weight to plant my feet beneath me to stand. I can detect Sophia in my periphery standing stock still, save for the subtle shaking of her head from side to side at me, but before I can shift my eyes to her, another loud clap lights up that same cheek, dropping my backside back to the floor. I look back up to her with the same stunned expression as before, but as soon as my eyes meet her crooked gaze, she's already pressed the sole of her big meaty foot against my chest. Just as my confused eyes point down to the horrible stinking podiatrist nightmare, she thrusts it forcefully forward, sending me more than a couple feet back like I've been dragged across the floor. The skin of my left buttock comes alight with burning agony as it scrapes harshly against the grain of the carpet. My teeth lock tightly and I roll that undoubtedly reddened cheek off of the floor in a desperate attempt to endure the throbbing fire lighting up my pain receptors like a Christmas tree. I have never regretted not wearing granny panties more in my life than I do right now. Suddenly, Sophia springs into action while the old woman still has her attention fixed to me. She lunges forward with the speed and grace of a cheetah running down its prey. Her right fist fades from sight as she steps into a hard, precision strike to the old woman's jaw with brutal efficiency. She quickly snaps back and goes to work on that same spot with 4 more rapid-fire blows in quick succession with that same fist. I have a less than rudimentary understanding of boxing at best, but even I can tell by the loud thudding cracks that vibrate the assembly tiny bones in my ear that the sheer amount of force that powers these blows should have ragdolled this sickly old woman right to the floor. Despite Sophia's skill with her fists, however, the hag does not go down. Not only does she remain upright, she doesn't even flinch or adjust her balance in response to the powerful strikes. This hard assault seems to no more trouble her than a gentle spring breeze lightly caressing her skin. Sophia cocks back to continue attacking, but in the blink of an eye, the old woman turns and with lightning-fast precision thrusts her entire head at Sophia. A nauseatingly wet crunch tickles my eardrums as the hag's forehead slams dead center into Sophia's face. The goth girl stumbles back with a splash of crimson already shining brightly against the pale skin of her upper lip. Her backside finds the floor and she immediately takes hold of her bleeding nose. With no other apparent options, an instinct drives me to emulate Sophia's attempt to take advantage of a distraction, only reversing the roles with her serving as the diversion this time. I desperately scoot toward the old woman, and from the floor, thrust a foot at her gut with as much force as I can summon. The old woman catches my ankle with a large, leathery hand before I can land the blow. I feel her warm, clammy grip tighten around my ankle, and with one jarring pull, my entire body jerks harshly upward, leaving the floor entirely. My heart drums with a newfound panic and confusion as this ancient woman effortlessly suspends me in the limbo between floor and ceiling with only one arm. Perplexed at this show of strength, I squirm and thrash desperately to be free of her grip. But despite my efforts, I can't feel any evidence that my 120 pounds is even slightly affecting her. She doesn't even adjust her stance to account for my weight. The whole of me seems to be no more burden to her than a bag of bread from the supermarket. It's like I'm dangling from one of those cranes you see on construction sites. Suddenly the loud clap of her other palm viciously swiping across my rug-burned cheek echoes off the condo walls, igniting fresh agony in the already tender skin. I reel in agony with watering eyes and clenched teeth, but can do little but endure the intense misery. She strikes the exact same spot again, but with so much more force that my hip pops. I cry out in helpless suffering, not sure if the skin down, or rather up, there is still intact. Suddenly she swings me once, then casually releases my ankle as if I had no more value than a sack of rotten potatoes. With a loud, aching thud, I've been returned to the floor where I squirm in agony as prickling fire consumes my skin. Sophia springs off of the floor and with another valiant effort slams her fist across the old lady's chin once more, but to the same effect. Unbothered by the bone-crunching blow, she simply raises a hand and swipes a palm against Sophia's cheeks so hard that her knees buckle and she falls to the floor next to me. Sophia quickly adjusts to get back up, but is only able to plant her elbows before another devastating palm swipes across her face and puts her on her back, where she remains, dazed with labored breath. Suddenly, the sickly-looking old lady hops off of the floor with all the sprightness of a 10-year-old, lifts an elbow into the air, tilts, and brings that elbow sharply down onto Sophia's gut with the force of a freight train. My eyes go wide in stunned disbelief as my friend's hands and feet fly into the air in response to the blow. The hag climbs off of the floor to her feet, with all the temperament of someone who's just finished tending a flower bed, rather than someone who has just brutalized 2 girls. She simply adjusts her old-fashioned dress and babushka. Sophia simply rolls to her side, holding her belly. She groans pathetically while coughing and attempting to catch her breath. My wide eyes, stunned with horror, simply shift from the ailing Sophia back to the old hag who is casually primping. I have no words.
You girls are just being silly kitties. A little rain won't bother us,
she sweetly assures, with more maternal warmth than I thought anyone capable.
Besides,
she continues,
home is the safest place for my little darlings. Far safer than some moldy old shelter filled with strange menfolk and their questionable intentions. Now I will hear no more of leaving our cozy little home. Go wash up and we shall have a nice breakfast and a lovely chat.
Absolutely perplexed, I glance back to Sophia, who is steadily gaining control of her breath, then back to the hag. Lady, you're... is all that I can pass from my lips before she plucks me off of the floor by the front of my Miskatonic hoodie. She draws me in close and parts her teeth, releasing a fresh wave of nauseating stench into my open mouth and nostrils. I fight to keep from vomiting in response to the overwhelming assault on my senses. She simply glares at me with her crooked gaze before swiping another hard palm across my face. Before my vision can even refocus, she claps that same palm hard across my face once more.
Please wash up for breakfast, beloved,
she intimately says through her teeth with the same pleasant sweetness. I is the only word that I can get out before her grimy fingers give a hard, agonizing twist to my ear. I cry out in pain and adjust my body to minimize the throbbing abuse of my ear, but quickly find that there is little I can do to alleviate the cruelty that afflicts me. She gives me one more twist to my poor ear, forcing it further out of shape than before. The misery blighting the sensory organs spikes tenfold, and though I shriek and protest, the old hag simply stares back with that same toothy grin. I see no other way to stop this torture than compliance. Okay, yes, I cry. She gives another hard turn to my ear, sending even more white-hot fire charging through it.
Yes, what, beloved?
She sweetly croaks. I rack my agony-roasted brain for the answer to this riddle, but some instinct for survival mercifully cracks it before I can ponder the problem any longer. I rest my pleading gaze on her to wait for a response. I can feel her hand rocking slightly forward on the side of my head, as if she were fighting the urge to give the ear one more agonizing crank. Thankfully, she doesn't. She simply releases my likely ruined ear and gives a thrust of the arm holding me so that I fall back to the floor with a bone-rattling thud. I'm aware of the carpet agitating the swats and rug burn on my backside, but those particular abuses seem to trouble me less than the fresher misery screaming through my ear.
Oh, such good girls,
she coos pleasantly as if we were the most precious things on the planet. I can feel a pang of relief loosen fear's grip on my throat, but remain hesitant to relax.
Now run along, and I'll have your breakfast waiting for you by the time you're done. Go on, scoot, my little darlings,
she sweetly croaks in her deep, tinny voice. The hag starts wandering back toward the kitchen, absent-mindedly muttering something to herself about getting a dining table for my condo. She seems to have no more mind of Sophia or myself. Shaking the daze out of my brain, I lay on the floor watching her for any indication that she may double back until her weird hobbling gait has taken her out of sight around the corner. I place a gentle palm to my throbbing ear and draw it back into my field of vision to inspect it for blood. Fortunately, the skin does not seem to have been broken. I turn to Sophia, who is breathing closer to normal now, but still holds her midsection in pain. I place a gentle palm on her shoulder and lean over to meet her emerald gaze. I silently mouth the words, "Are you okay?" to her, preferring not to make any sound that would draw the hag back to us. Sophia's body is tensed and her face is contorted into a grimace of great discomfort, but she nods affirmatively, shifting onto her elbows with a noticeable attempt to avoid exacerbating her condition. I give a quick scan to the condo floor for my glasses. Discovering that they hadn't fallen too far from my current position, I pluck them off of the carpet. However, placing them back on the bridge of my nose reveals to me the large spiderweb crack in the left lens, effectively rendering it entirely pointless in its intended purpose of enhancing my subpar vision. This inconvenience pulls a dejected sigh out of me before I plant my feet and wobble awkwardly to them. I take a moment to steady my trembling legs. The bones feel like jelly, and their rigidity threatens to betray me at any moment, but I wrangle control of them. While they are still subject to my will, I reach down and carefully help Sophia to her feet, trying my best to avoid causing her more harm than what's already been cruelly inflicted upon her. She suppresses a pained squeak in response to the movement, and when we are both upright, I can feel her resting her body weight on me for support until she is sure that her feet are properly planted. I've never seen her look so small before. Doubled over and beaten into submission, a few delicate coughs spasm her torso. Though I've got a couple inches on her, I can't remember an instance where we've both been standing, and it didn't feel like we weren't looking eye to eye. Before I can further ponder the pitiful state of my companion, the stinking air vibrates with Auntie's low, tinny hum again.
I do not hear the pitter-patter of dainty little feet skipping merrily to the washroom,
she chirps mirthfully from the kitchen. My eyes go wide and my back goes straight with alarm. Though her words drip with sugary sweetness, I know enough to take them as a veiled threat. A threat without explicit promise of harm, but a guarantee of it. I assure my grip on Sophia and do my best to shuffle her as delicately but as quickly to the bathroom as I can. We scamper into the bathroom where the air is less oppressively dense. I quickly shut and lock the flimsy door behind us. Sophia rests her palms on either side of the sink as she inspects her bloody upturned nose for breaks. Never having been filled with so many questions in my life as I am right now, I urgently unload onto her. What the hell, Michigan, is going on? Who is that? Have you ever seen her before? I prod in a yelling whisper. Sophia simply continues calmly studying her brutalized face in the mirror. I wait on pins and needles as she remains silent, poking delicately at the bridge of her nose with gentle fingertips to gauge the damage. I find myself unable to tolerate the silence. I woke up warm in my bed, expecting an annoying day, but a relatively mundane one, not having my ass absolutely handed to me by some random old lady who broke into my condo. Did she seriously just elbow drop you like The Rock at WrestleMania? I shakily prattle confusedly to Sophia's side. The emerald eyes of her reflection shift to mine. She hovers an index finger before her closed lips to signal silence. When she is sure that I've understood her gesture, she points that same finger down to the faucet before giving a full turn of the hot water dial. The sound of the high pressure of the water hitting the bowl of the sink drowns out all other ambient noise. She beckons me closer with one nod of her head in the other direction. I comply to the silent request and join her at the sink. Valid questions and concerns, she says intimately in a slightly strained monotone. I don't know who she is or where she came from, she continues. I woke up in Sylvia's bed and she was just standing over me with that twisted grinning. Sophia cups her hands under the flowing water before bending down to rinse the blood from her nose. I wait patiently for her to continue. I thought she was a sleep paralysis-induced hallucination until she physically removed me from the bed. As thin an assumption as it was, I assumed she was acquainted with you in some capacity. But after that little scuffle in the living room, I saw you're just as vexed as I am. I'd hoped that Sophia would say something, anything, to make at least some small portion of this make sense. But my confusion seems to be increasing rather than waning. I am again aware of the intense stinging that burns my ear. Without anything else to do, I join Sophia in the mirror to check my injuries. Tilting my head before the reflective surface, I can better view the remnants of Auntie's abuse. So neither one of us knows who this psycho is. Great. I poke my reddened ear with cautious fingertips. When I find the sensory organs still technically intact, I abandon it in favor of checking other injuries. Lifting the back of my hoodie and showing my rear end to the mirror, I find exactly what I expected to see. A big, reddened patch of stinging flesh that stretches from butt to thigh. A dejected sigh hisses out of me like steam escaping from an old pipe. Why is she so strong? I know I'm not that big, but she was dangling me upside down with one hand like I was nothing, I asked privately. Sophia remains quiet again, but this time her brow dips thoughtfully and her eyes stare deeply into themselves in the mirror. Her chest expands as she painfully draws in a deep breath before releasing it in a long sigh, as if preparing to admit a truth better avoided. It's the kind of sigh someone sighs before having to delicately deliver terrible news. Her lips part hesitantly, but for a moment, no sound leaves her. I may just be playing into my well-established reputation as a spooky chick, but I'm not entirely sure we're dealing with an actual human woman, she cautiously admits. The eyes of her reflection shift back to me and await a response. Though many have a bit of trouble getting a read on her, I find myself understanding her subtle body language more and more these days. She's clearly serious. I have to admit to myself that some part of me was already flirting with the idea of this encounter playing out like something from the horror section at the local Blockbuster. When they were still around, anyway. I suppose I have my own reputation for being something of a spooky chick. And I didn't want to let my mind wander there either. I hate to admit it, but you might be onto something, I submissively offer. As cliche as it may sound, I've seen enough horror movies to know something is extremely off about our guest here. Everything, in fact. The overpowering smell, the freakish strength, how fast she moves. Hell, when she was smacking us around, there was something weird about her hands. Something I can't quite... like they were too... dense, Sophia adds calmly. Yeah, exactly, I respond, suppressing the volume of my voice midway through my exclamation. Like they were too solid for just an old lady. Or anyone else for that matter. Like there were too many bones or something, she continues with a thoughtful rub of her reddened cheek. That, and I get the sense that she's behaving so familiarly with us because she is familiar with us. She keeps calling me precious girl. That's what my dad used to call me when he was still alive. It could just be overthinking, a coincidence, but the inflection is so familiar, she says almost more to herself than me. The more Sophia speculates, the more my goose flesh crawls with unease. A growing sense of violation begins stirring to life from deep within. Her little name for me is also intimately familiar. I can feel my body go small and draw inward before a violent shudder spasms my torso. The revelation sits heavy on my stomach like tainted meat. Now that you mention it, beloved is what Mima Duke called me, I somberly add. As if on divine cue, the sudden resounding of thunder booming loudly outside rattles the walls of the condo bathroom, making me flinch. It was very close. I had noticed due to the distraction of the problem at hand, but the steady patter of the rainfall outside is no longer a gentle rhythm. It has advanced to the low, constant roar of a heavy downpour. Hurricane Megan is almost here. As level-headed as you and I strive to be, I don't think we have the luxury of employing more mundane solutions to this problem, Sophia muses. I suppress the flattered smile that attempts to perk the corners of my mouth in response to her considering me as rational as I consider her. I simply nod in consideration. I think you may be right, I lament. We may have to throw off our Scully caps and put on our Mulder hats. As terrified as I am to admit it, I think this one might fall more into your wheelhouse than mine. What do you reckon we're dealing with? Sophia draws in another long breath, wincing in discomfort, and visibly tenses herself in response to the aching in her body. I really don't like that it hurts her to even breathe. She locks eyes with her own reflection again before she releases the air slowly from her inflated lungs. Her brow twitches once, and her facial features form into an expression of placid contemplation as a few drops of her fresh blood fall from her nostril into the bowl of the sink. Well, there isn't much to go on, but the babushka points me to Polish or Russian folklore. Russia, most likely, because of the Rebecca and the seraph she's wearing, the blouse and the dress. Let's assume that everything's motivations, man, beast, or other, are to seek nourishment. She hasn't just torn us apart and eaten us, and with how strong she's shown herself to be, I don't think we could stop her if that's all she wanted. So either there are a certain set of rules to what's going on here, or she feeds on something else. A certain emotion, perhaps, like fear or anger, which is arguably worse than just eating us outright. Some sort of home invasion parasite, maybe? She calmly contemplates. Her teeth lock tightly and she winces with discomfort again. Even her own words appear to be draining her and causing her agony. I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking straight through the pain. My skull is still ringing from when she headbutted me, and I think the little chat we had before you joined us left me with one or two broken ribs. She strains. Sophia wipes the blood from her nose with the back of her hand, erects herself, and lifts up the front of her Bauhaus hoodie to reveal a large, discolored patch of very tender-looking skin over the left rack of her rib cage. It's already starting to go a ghastly plum purple with deep bruising. My eyes go wide with morbid shock. Sophia may be far more injured than I initially thought. This revelation churns my stomach with grim understanding that my friend may be in need of immediate medical attention, and that brute force, no matter how precise we can manage, may not be an option. Sylvia contended for a welterweight title recently. She's a professional boxer who Sophia had a hand in training. No one just beats Sophia Spumoni Rizzo into submission, and even if they did, they wouldn't be able to just walk into the kitchen and start making breakfast like nothing happened. They get something for their trouble. The eyes of her reflection shift back to mine, and it's clear that she understands that I understand the situation. You saw me repeatedly hooking her jaw. That's essentially a knockout button if you can land a solid enough blow. But she just kept eating my fist like I was blowing her kisses. I wasn't holding back either, she somberly admits. I can feel the knot in my stomach tighten. She slowly lowers the hoodie, taking great care not to agitate the tender, discolored patch of skin over her ribs any further. Besides, she continues, even if we knew what she was, who's to say that the likely dozens of iterations of the attached folklore would be reflective of reality? I mean, we're talking about stories that have been passed around by word of mouth for centuries before it was even common to write anything down. There's no telling what's been changed or left out altogether. As much as I would love to counter her point and deliver a neat little contrivance in rebuttal, I can't think of anything. While every mechanism of my brain attempts to offer up a glib, cliché argument in the form of a horror movie trope, I can't bring myself to disagree. She's right. A bit of schoolyard gossip about something that happened 5 minutes ago is bound to have several additions and extractions from the original version of events by the time it loops around. Never mind something at the mercy of entire cultures adopting something and changing it to suit their own sensibilities. According to General Mills, Leprechauns are good-natured little gingers who just want to share a sugary bowl of marshmallows and cardboard, when the actual lore is probably closer to a Warwick Davis, I want me gold scenario. Hell, I've made Sylvia sit through the original Friday the 13th 7 times since she moved in, and every single time she's shocked that Jason isn't the killer. Sophia's right. I continue taxing my brain for a moment before sudden epiphany strikes me like white-hot lightning tearing through my brain. Wait a minute, I squeal with restrained excitement. My phone! I pocketed my phone before I left my bedroom. We can just call the police. Sophia turns to me with slightly widened eyes as I fumble my hands into the pocket on the front of my hoodie. We really are a couple of overly obsessed spooky chicks. So spooky that we're standing here trying to figure out how to take on Lovecraftian nightmares when the simplest solution was available to us the entire time. Big cops with big guns. I continue fumbling in my pocket for another moment. I can feel my blood starting to go cold when my hands simply meet in the middle and find only each other. I desperately probe the confines of the little flap of fabric in search of the little bit of plastic and metal that could summon far bigger and more physically imposing individuals than ourselves to aid us. My stomach churns again when desperation gives way to grim acceptance. Damn it! It must have fallen out when she was tossing me around, I submissively lament. Though I know she's internally experiencing whatever version of panic that's unique to her, Sophia doesn't seem outwardly affected one way or the other. I, on the other hand, am visibly fighting the frustration and despair that is trying to bring me to my knees. Frustration for being denied a simple solution, and the fact that for all of our modern conveniences, contemporary comforts always seem to be inconveniently absent when you truly need them the most. We don't, however, have the luxury of dwelling on options that are currently unavailable to us. The hurricane is getting closer. We need to get out of here like now, I petulantly whine to the ceiling. Sophia sighs thoughtfully as she considers this. I start suddenly as our private counsel is broken. Oh, girls, Auntie's deep, tinny voice calls sweetly. Your breakfast is ready. My heart thumps with one horrid, discordant beat before continuing steadily in a quicker rhythm. A sense of urgency begins dancing me around as if I needed to make use of the facilities. My attention shifts back to Sophia, who seems to have picked up on my body language. We need to play nice until we can think of something to help us escape, she calmly states in a weary monotone. Escape. And there it is. The word weighs heavy on my racing mind. Victims on the wrong end of something powerfully horrible are usually associated with the concept. Despite frequent daydreaming of what I would personally do in a horror scenario, I never actually had any flesh and blood desire to place my flesh or my blood in such a predicament. It represents the acknowledgement of the inescapable fact that escape is necessary. We're trapped. And now that it's been spoken aloud, there's no possibility to reason otherwise. I can offer little more to Sophia's reflection in response than a tight-lipped nod in the affirmative. Girls, Auntie sweetly calls again. Her second call lights a fire beneath me, and before I can even process what I'm doing, I give a quick rinse of my face and hands. Sophia does the same. After we both slightly cleanse our faces and hands like a couple of children lazily going through the motions, we quickly towel off. Coming, Auntie, I call back as pleasantly as I can. It feels dirty and wrong to call her that. It feels like some part of me is submitting to whatever sick game is being played here, but sacrificing that one speck of dignity is ultimately for the greater good if it can buy us even one more moment to think of a way out of here before the storm traps us. I look over to Sophia and meet her actual gaze. She plugs her bleeding nostril with a tiny wad of toilet paper and gives me an almost expressionless nod. I return it with a weary sigh before she turns the faucet to stop the water, leaving the low roar of the rain outside as the only sound filling the silence between us. All my life, I've been a horror junkie through and through. I've often wondered what I would do to combat the horrors that lurk in the shadows just beyond man's perceptions. I've consumed so much of the macabre that I never doubted for a single moment that should some nameless terror presented itself to me, I'd be able to pluck a solution out of the old internal library as quickly as I drew my next breath. But much like the intellectuals who often serve as protagonists in Lovecraftian literature, all my knowledge does me absolutely no good in the face of true horror. I feel a pang of foolish embarrassment, a burning shame born of the same hubris that leads some overly confident jackasses to believe that a few successful rounds of Call of Duty qualifies them as expert marksmen. It's much easier to yell at the final girl for running up the stairs from the safety of your sofa when she's the one terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought. It's much easier to say what a horror protagonist should do when you're an intangible consciousness in no real danger peeking over their shoulder, with knowledge they have no earthly way of possessing. There is no sense of safety or control. I can't pause the horror in the other room with a press of my thumb. I can't close the book in which she serves as antagonist. Sophia and I are in very real trouble. I don't know what to do. Sophia stirs me from the haze of my wandering thoughts as she steels herself with a harsh exhalation that could almost be called a grunt. She extends her hand to the door, inviting me to open it. I inflate my lungs to capacity before releasing the breath in a long, weary sigh. I open the door, and we reluctantly venture back into the condo proper to face this sweet-talking, foul-smelling invader. We venture back into the lion's den, half-naked, beaten, and with no plan. Hopefully, something occurs to us before the storm gets too bad, and before the old hag gets a mind to kick us around again. Though Sophia's putting up a strong front, broken ribs are serious. Going another round with our captor could gain her a pierced lung, or worse. We have to find a way to get out of here, and we have to find it now.